All right. Hello and welcome to our September edition of the Growth Lab. My name is Danielle Porter, and I'm the Sales and Marketing Communications Manager for Leverage Lab. Our mission with this webinar series is to help B2B media companies understand how to transform data into profit. And today's session is no exception. At Leverage Lab, we regularly hear from CEOs and executive management that the pressure to generate leads has shifted the focus away from the original mission of connecting buyers and sellers through quality content. Today, we'll share insights from several of these CEOs who are currently grappling with this challenge. So before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. Please feel free to use the chat feature to send any questions that you have throughout the session, and we'll try to save some time at the end to do a little Q&A. As always, we will send the recorded session over to you after we wrap so that you can use it for future use. We really hope that you leave today with some actionable ideas and a renewed focus for delivering content that truly resonates. Hand it over to you, AnnMarie, to get us started.
Thank you. So I'm AnnMarie Wills, the CEO and co-founder of Leverage Lab, and I'm joined by John French, the CEO and owner of French LLC. Let's skip to the next slide. Just so you understand a little bit about Leverage Lab and where we come from, always do a very quick summary of us. And, essentially, Leverage Lab is a revenue partner to B2B and B2C media companies. We are helping them drive new revenue by leveraging their rich audience data. We bring a full solution of pre-built data management capabilities, sales training and enablement. We do reporting and analytics to help supercharge your campaign programs. And effectively, it's our goal to get you into revenue production from these new capabilities as fast as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to John French, who's going to really go deep into this conversation about the identity crisis that many B2B media companies find themselves in today.
Great, thank you, AnnMarie, and thanks everyone for attending. And I've been waiting a while to jump into this topic because I love it. And for those people who may not know who I am, prior to becoming basically an advisor to media companies, I ran as CEO for them. As a CEO. So I kind of know the subject and know the feeling of the C-suite, and hope to give you some insights. This is one of these webinars. We may ask as many questions as we answer, actually, and that's okay, because what we want to do is to get the focus on who B2B companies and even B2C companies, who are they now? And I had an opportunity to interview 6 CEOs, contemporaries of mine that grew up in the industry or newer ones. And each time I asked them this question, the response was immediately, yeah, that's a great question. That's what's going on now. And then I couldn't take the notes fast enough, which is a really good thing. So, there'll be 2 quotes here that are anonymous, and then the rest are sourced. And we'd like to go through each one of them and what they mean. And most importantly, give you at the very end, we only have 30 minutes, so get to the end and give you some takeaways and from all this. So the first quote is, we're in an identity crisis. It's more confusing now to be a B2B CEO than ever before. I absolutely agree with that. And I have the opportunity, I do a lot of advisement work and a lot of M&A work, and I talk to CEOs all the time. And it just seems that when we went into the pandemic, B2B was in decent shape. Then during the pandemic, when the trade shows, the cash cows all left, we were forced to really become innovative and to spread the products and use the technology. And I don't just mean virtual events, I'm talking about all technologies. So all of a sudden there was this influx and we all became a lot smarter. We come out of the pandemic, the trade shows are back, so people are making money again. But what happened was the people that we sell to became so sophisticated on what they're asking us that it's harder to be a salesperson today. It's harder to be a CEO today. I'll get in that in a couple of minutes. So you look at the 3 big challenges: increasing complexity. I was just talking to someone the other day, and I'm dating myself, but when I started, there was just print magazines, and we waited once or twice a year for what was called a BPA statement. And I'm sure there's several people on this call saying, I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but we thought it was complex back then. Now, we're accountable almost on a daily, hourly basis to our customers. They're all over us asking for performance. So I think that's the complexity there. Content at the end of the day is king, but how do people make the decision on how much to spend on content and how much is the commercial pressure? When I became the CEO, actually it was 5 companies. When I became the CEO of Investment News, one of the first things I asked, I said, what's the inventory online? And they said, well, we have newsletters. And I said, well, how many? And they said 18. I said, we have 18 newsletters? And they said, yeah, we produce one every time someone asks in the customer base client. And I said, but how can that, I understand it's money and I understand that, but how can we produce 18 newsletters a week? We're killing our audiences and and content cannot be that great. So we cut them down, we made more money and they were better. And then the rapid technology changes. We'll get to that towards the end, but not only AI, but things like AI. So how is that part of our core mission? So if we could jump to the next slide. I love this quote, and I'm not going to tell you who it is, but this one sets it up beautifully. I'm getting hammered daily by my sales team who are getting hammered by their customers who just want leads. What the hell ever happened to quality and content? Now, you think about that, and AnnMarie is going to comment on all these as well. We're going to kind of go back and forth, which we'd love to do in these webinars. But you think about that, that really captures a lot of where people are today, and people who are running companies, people running divisions. And what does the customer want? Well, we know what the customer wants, but do we have the attributes and the technology to do it, to deliver that? So, AnnMarie.
Yeah, I think, we sort of have this hypothesis that leads, if you really boiled it down, what they're really asking for are signals. And a lead is a very tangible signal that's attributed to a human individual. Most everything else in our portfolios are not attributable to people. So if you're living within a B2B brand and your boss is like, hey, I need to see real return on my advertising spend, I want to see real results. The easiest and best way to get those real results is to think about leads. But I think it's our belief that you have intention, data, and signals all over the place within your enterprise. It's a matter of getting your arms around all of it.
Yeah, I agree. And by the intent, that to me in our business is one of the most important developments in a long, long time. To your point, if someone has an intent to do something and we can pick it up almost instantaneously and deliver that makes the advertisers so much happier and more successful, and we're just starting to get over that bridge. And friend Bill Carter, CEO, Bill nailed it. Sets up the rest of the presentation. He said, I think companies need to decide what stake they want to drive in the ground in this new world. And what he said, basically, that was brilliant. What he said was, you have to choose now. Are you a technology company? Are you a content company? Are you almost like an agency? Whatever that is, you better make sure it's right. But you better put your stake in the ground. And he also, mentioned AI in time could be an existential threat to content production. And I'll talk about that a little bit down the line, but just stating who you are, as simple as that before we get to any other part of the presentation.
Absolutely. I mean, my only comment is that when we work with publisher partners, the most success that we see them have is when they do exactly this, make that really bold decision about where they're going to plant their stake.
Great. And then Matt Riley is the CEO of Fusible, and I worked with Fusible, which was Miranda Riley for several years, so I know the company. And Matt's great. I said, what do you think? And he said, I'd ask people, are they building a moat around their business? And I said, that's interesting because I'm talking about, technology here. And he said, look, I think it's more important than who we are. And he said, in most companies in this industry are going to be sold. And because of high interest rates over the last couple of years, outside of yesterday, the interest rates are still pretty high. So deals are hard to do. And he made a great point. He said, if you don't have clarity of vision, your owners don't care. They expect you to sort it out. What he was saying is, it's our responsibility, not just the C-suite, everyone in this call and everyone in this industry, to figure out what you want to be and then go with it. And we'll talk about, well, actually, I think it's the next slide, about how to use that technology to do that. Our old friend Blair Johnson. If anyone knows Blair, he's been a friend of AnnMarie and I for a long time. And he's the CEO of Ascend Media. And you can tell Blair's a man of very few words. But when he says something, I listen. What he said basically was, it still comes down to content. AI is overblown. And it's the legend of the Rick Bush story. And I'll make this quick. But when I was the CEO of Prime Media, that's right. And that's where I met AnnMarie back in the early 2000s. In Overland Park, Kansas, and the year was 2003. And I was out there, my wife and children were back in New Jersey, the kids were still young, and I was traveling a lot, and it was the middle of August in 2003, August 14th. And we were only about a year and a half, almost 2 years, unfortunately, out of 9/11. And those of us who were in New York, there was always a constant concern when things happen. I'm sure it was for everybody, but if you were involved, it was. And all of a sudden, if you remember that day, the entire upper Midwest and Northeast had a blackout. Tens of millions of people lost power. And we turned on, and it wasn't Overland Park, we had power. We turned on a big screen in my conference room to CNN, I think it was, and they were talking about terrorism. And it was scaring the hell out of people, including me, because I'm thinking, how do I get back to New Jersey? The point of this story is content. At that time, and they still do it, it's part of Endeavor now, it was called T&D World, Transportation Distribution World. And the chief editor was a guy named Rick Bush, a delightful, smart guy. And that whole magazine and website was devoted to the national electric grid and how it works. And he was a well-known advisor. So I called him and he said, I'll come right back, I'll come up. I said, I walked in and he said, what's going on? I said, do you see that blackout? And he said, yeah. I said, do you think it's terrorism? Because they're saying it's terrorism up here, probably, they don't know. And he literally looked at me, this is the height of B2B content. He looked at me and he said, no. I said, what? And he said, I can't guarantee it's not content, but everybody in the industry knew or knows that the grid from around Cleveland to Buffalo up through Ontario, and he goes on and on for the next 5 minutes, how it's always breaking down. And First Energy is the company that doesn't want to spend money on it, and something tripped it, and was tripped because it was August 14th, it was a very hot day, and New York was pulling all that power down, and it kept cascaded in power outages. I'm like, that's all? And he said, yeah, it's not terrorism. That's content. That's B2B content. And I knew that before CNN because of this guy. And so that's the legend of Rick Bush. And if he's still out there, I want to share that story with him because it was damn impressive. That brings in audience.
Wow, I don't even know how to follow the Rick Bush story. That's amazing. But I think what it really illustrates for me, you know, we talk a lot about AI sort of taking over content creation, but generative AI is really summarizing the available content that lives on the web. So if we're creating content from content that already exists, how organically authentic is that content? How meaningful is it? I think anyone who's talking about the idea of content creation and AI is saying very, very clearly that it's novel and organically authentic content that has a strong point of view that is, I'll say the word again, novel, is really what's going to stand out when it comes to the use of these AI tools in search. You know, so much of our traffic comes from search. So if it's really just, you know, if we're really just putting out content that's a summary of everything else that anybody else has ever written about that topic, we're not going to get that search traffic. It's going to require us to really, really double down on novel and authentic content.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, I was in part of a meeting yesterday, well, a presentation by a guy named Matt Domo, and he was the chief architect of Amazon Web Services. So this person, pretty powerful, smart guy. And we were talking about AI and B2B. And he said, you know, a lot of publishers I talk to are afraid of the Google summaries that come out every day, that they're basically scraping all this stuff together and they're delivering it. He said, they're really afraid of that. And someone asked, well, what would you do? He said, oh, I changed my content to be part of it. Write some of your content to be part of the Google summary every day when it comes out. And if it's good enough content, then you're going to reach a much wider audience, even if it's mostly AI generated. At some point, a human has to come in and fix it or package it, but don't run from Google. Actually become involved with it because they're going to help you expand your base. And I thought that was a really refreshing kind of like non-paranoid view of AI.
Yeah.
Great. okay, Prescott Childs, who's the CEO of the Farm Journal. He says, whatever we think we are, a tech company, an agency, etc. In the end, marketers crave safety. And he's absolutely right. And I said, what do you mean safety? And he said, people make decisions to run with our tools, our websites, our webinars. But they report to someone. As AnnMarie mentioned earlier, their boss is going to say, okay, we spent $100,000 on this thing. What did we get? So they crave the safety of the performance. But his take is, and Prescott loves technology. I've known him forever. But he had an interesting point of view. He said, yeah, use all the available technology. All the stuff out there, it's all great, or if it isn't, don't use it, but at least take a look at it. But he said, don't become a victim of these tools. And what he means by that is, if you're a media company and you're building tools and technology platforms and all this other stuff internally, and once you launch, you almost become, what's the word I'm looking for, out of date the day you launch, because there are other people who do this. They build all these tools that are available, but don't do them internally. Love the technology, but don't become a technology company. You're a media company. You produce content and you attract audiences that people want to pay you to go find.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this statement of, safety is really, really critical. We see a lot of organizations sort of building things that are really already proven capabilities that partners can bring to the table. But instead of taking advantage of those partners and using that core competency that they possess, they're, really insistent on building it themselves. And what that fundamentally does is extends the amount of time it takes to get to the end game goal, puts the ability to actually deliver those results a bit at risk if we're not, using tried and true best practices or things of that nature. So I think your statement and what Prescott's getting across here is really, really, it's really meaningful. And it's something that we see every single day in our practice.
I think the other part, and he used the word, don't become a victim of these tools. The other way I phrase it as well is don't fall in love with the tools. Don't fall in love with the technology. Stick to your core roots and go out and please, I don't know how many CEOs are in the audience, and we'll see this as a recording. Fund your audience development people. One of my work with AnnMarie, it's been really interesting. We get to talk to a lot of audience development people. The most important two things that a company does is content, and I think we do spend money there. Could be more, but audience development. Give your audience development people the money and the tools to find new audiences, because that's your lifeblood. And sometimes I see, and I did it myself when it was a mistake. If I had to save on a budget going into a new year, I'd kind of carve around a little bit the audience development because I thought it wouldn't hurt. That's really short-sighted.
Yeah, just to dovetail on that, it's not just finding the audience, it's in keeping that audience engaged. We monetize these days through engagement, not through the number of names that sit on a database. Fundamentally, if we don't have that engagement, then all of the products that rely on it so heavily are underserved. So there's funding that needs to take place continuously to drive engagement as well as drive that audience growth.
Agreed. And then sometime partner actually, Parameter 1 with the Leverage Lab in the marketplace. And by the way, we've all known each other for a long time. And Eric is a bright guy, and he's the CEO of Parameter 1. He started the company with some partners that came out of Endeavor. And to be honest, when I was running Cygnus, they were my IT people. And I love them. What he said basically is, most media companies don't understand the value of a name. And he said, if we truly understood how valuable a name is, then the mission would become a lot clearer. And that's related to what I was just saying about audience development. If media companies understood the value and the life of that name, that it would make it a lot easier to justify spending money on audience development tools and platforms, stuff to go out and find them. And I think AnnMarie and I were talking about this quote. Not only do we agree with Eric, but I think AnnMarie has some even broader views of what a name and the value of a name is.
Yeah, this is like the holy grail for audience development people. It's always been this like unattainable metric, like to really, really know what every single person in your ecosystem is delivering in terms of value to the company, to us as media operators. Like that's been really a challenge to create because our data sits so separately on those two fronts. Audience data lives in audience databases, financial data lives in financial systems. But the future, like, and where we are now, we have the ability to have that data live together, and creating that metric is entirely possible. So, to be able to get there, I think we're just on the cusp of it. One of my team members sent over an article today. I was kind of reading it really quickly, but it was a quote from Reddit. Reddit is a challenge, and not a challenge, but it's a competitor to many of our B2B spaces because they're active community of conversations and engagements that are existing around specific topics. A lot of them are business topics. And Reddit knows exactly how much value each and every person in their world delivers. They know that every known audience member delivers $17 in value a year. Every unknown audience member delivers $5. So again, I think what that just like, points at is the idea that we have to have a better sense of our data, especially our known user data, and get that connected to our value so that we can understand those exact same things about the business that we run.
That's phenomenal. I was not aware of that metric of $17 from a known user. And it's funny, and again, I'm very pro media, pro B2B, because I love it, but it's kind of funny, a company like Reddit, when I'm on it, which is not all that often, but it's usually just people complaining about back and forth about things. But you see a little bit more business stuff creep in. Well, they own that conversation. We don't own that conversation. And and that's part of the problem. And I was in a seminar, I think it was like before BIMS was BIMS, but maybe it was, well, I don't know, but it was a while ago. And I was in a seminar about all CEOs. And we had the guy who was at that time in charge of sales at LinkedIn. And he said way back, just going back 10 years or whatever it had been, he said, don't worry about it. LinkedIn is not going to come into B2B. We're not going to take any of our advertising because we're only here to link people. And I audibly laughed. I was uncontrollable. I said, come on. And he said, no. Well, look what happened. Look what's happened. What's happening on LinkedIn? It's happening in Google and Facebook and all that stuff. So again, it comes back to content. And the content on Reddit, in my opinion, is not that great. It's just a bunch of people talking about things, but they own the conversation. Okay, and then finally, old friend Andy Fleurin, with Active Interest Media, they're B2B, but they're also B2C in the enthusiast field. And I think this last quote really sums it up. He nailed it. He just said, losing sight of building communities and serving them with high quality content and derivative products and services is at risk here. And the last part of his quote was, I have not seen media companies successfully pivot to lead gen data or agencies, even though some of them have tried. And I'd probably be a little bit controversial here, but there's been a move, what I've seen, of bringing in agency backgrounds into media companies. And they're bright people, but by virtue of being part of an agency, their primary mission has been to serve their clients, working through media and all of that, as opposed to creating the audience and finding that audience. And then that's when they come in, maybe a little bit more better with marketing and all that stuff. So a couple of tips. We're going to get to the takeaways in a minute, but I think that's one of the big takeaways, and I'll talk about it actually in the first item of the takeaways. AnnMarie?
Yeah, I mean, not to dogpile on agencies here. That's definitely not my intention, but we serve a lot of brands outside of our media partnerships. So we're working with brands to help them organize their customer data and use it to better power activation for either, product, acquiring new customers or building engagement. And what we see is that the agency ecosystem out there just doesn't understand how to utilize first party data. It's a bit foreign to them. So, to bring this concept of, hey, establishing an agency by bringing in agency type resources when the first party data is not something that they're, fundamentally, familiar with or know how to use. It's a bit of a mismatch. So, there's careful evaluation to be done here, I would say, at the very least.
You're definitely more gentle than I am, but so the takeaway is, if we stray from our roots, we don't want to make this overly dramatic, but again, the whole purpose of this discussion is get you thinking, everyone who's on this in this webinar, and continue to get us thinking, where have we strayed from the roots? And one of the takeaways I would recommend, and I've done it in the past, is take your organizational chart today as it exists, and then compare it to where it was 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, and see what the changes are. And it will tell you whether you've gone in one direction too far or not. And in most of the time I've been in the industry, there was in the C-suite, there was the CEO and the CFO, and that was for a long time. And all of a sudden, we come up with CMOs, okay, marketing important, CTOs, technology very important. Now we're coming up with content data officers, chief data officers. And I'm sure somewhere there's going to be, or there is now, a chief AI officer. Well, that's a lot of chiefs. So, are they focused on producing content to quality audiences? And sometimes I've seen companies drift because they know they should have data, they should understand it. So they go out and hire someone from a data industry, or they go out and hire someone from a marketing firm, but that don't always have the DNA of media. And I'm not talking about just B2B, I just talk about media. And sometimes I've seen companies drift that way. So I take the first one is to take a look at your org charts. And what I'll do, AnnMarie, is I'll go through these, and then we can, please add as I go, stop me. But as Bill Carter says, take a stand in the marketplace and with your employees and the people that work for you, and say, hey, we love the technology. We're gonna, but we know, salesperson, you're getting hammered, but by the first quote, you're getting hammered by your advertisers because they're so much more sophisticated. They know what to ask, and we're being monitored all the time. So take that stand and say, okay, we're not going to complain about that. We're going to take it to our advantage, and here's the way we're going to do it. And then the importance and power of quality content. I mean, I can't hit that any harder, because if you think about the Rick Bush example, yeah, it was 20 years ago, but he told me something about a major impactful story that was all over the world, and he told it to me before the news sources figured it out. That's the power of content, even in the B2B world, and the value of audience. AnnMarie, please take that one, because you live there.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about it already, but the idea that you add a name to a database doesn't ensure that you have an engaged user. So that's just the beginning of the customer journey, really. And again, if we don't have engaged audiences, we can't, and we're not creating, high value content, those two things feed off of each other. We can't create the audience without the high value content. So there's absolutely a critical nature to all of this. And again, our products, the value that our advertisers find in us is by creating the engagement. So if the products are, reliant on engaged users, you can see how this, synergy works.
Yeah, exactly. And then I loved your example about the three-legged stool. Do you mind going through that?
Sure. We just have always thought about our media business as content, audience, and delivery is happening in lots and lots of different places because people engage in lots and lots of different places. So, if two of those legs are sawn a little short, then, it's a very unstable platform. So, it's a pretty simple analogy. Everybody will understand, but a critical one to review. I think, John talked about looking at your org chart. I mean, look at the P&L too, to make sure that you are, supporting, like he said, the audience groups and the content groups in ways that are providing that stable foundation.
Great.
Well, that is our 30 minutes.
Danielle had
Any other takeaways you want to bring to the surface, John?
What's that?
Any other takeaways you want to bring to the surface?
I think I got them all. I think people probably are tired of listening to it now, but I love media and I love what's happening in the industry. And I've said this several times in my career. This golden eras. I think we're in one of those right now. I really do. And we'll talk about this in future webinars. But there's a product available that can actually decipher 24/7. Sometimes someone in your audience puts their hands up and they can be identified. And that's something I've dreamt about as a CEO in the media business for a long time. And it's finally starting to come to fruition.
Absolutely. The future is bright. Well, in
So we have a
that,
question. Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
go
We
ahead.
have a question in
Oh,
the
thank you.
chat.
Are you able
So
to
the
read it,
question
please?
is, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
how do you make CEOs and CFOs see the value of the names? How important audience is? I mean, that is, I can tell you from my seat that I've always sat in, which was the audience developer seat, it is providing the data necessary to show that the bulk of the money that's being created for the business typically rests on a very small percentage of people that live in your database. Like when we first started Leverage Lab, we had a metric that showed, basically 80% of anyone's database is actually valid. 60% of it is reachable. 20% of it is engaged. And 5% of it is delivering the high value actions that drive the bulk of your revenue production. That's terrifying if you think of it. So, our position was always to establish that for you and then measure that, continuously so that we're really focusing our energy on the people who we need to move from that sort of disengaged and just sitting there like a zombie on the database, moving them into engagement because that drives the value of the revenue that we're producing. So that would be my answer. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm sitting on the other seat and having presentations over the years of funding audience development. One thing that I've come to, basically what I would say is, don't make audience development a cost center. And people would say, well, of course it's a cost center. I said, it's part of the revenue stream. If the audience is good, I'll keep spending more money and more money and more money because we're going to be making more revenue against that. So I think it comes down to that somehow establishing the value of a name. And if an audience development person could say to me, I'm the CEO, that if you spend this money right here, then AnnMarie and is worth this over the length of her life in our ecosystem, and she's worth this much to advertisers, then why would I suppress an ad budget in audience development? I think the part of the problem is that the C-suite hasn't been convinced that this is an investment. It's more of a cost of doing business. And I think that's what we have to change within audience development. And I think once you get that, and act more like a revenue center along with costs as opposed to a cost center.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, the math is pretty simple. And we actually have a one-sheeter sort of methodology on how to do the math, to have it in its most simple form, but it's super impactful. So hit me up on LinkedIn or Danielle or John, or, hit our website and contact us. If you know me, just call me, I'll send it to you. And, hopefully it's something that will have an impact for you.
Great.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Well, thank you, everybody. We went a couple of minutes over, but really
We really
appreciate it.
AnnMarie and John, thank you very much. I feel like, that's probably one of the most transparent conversations any one of us have heard on a webinar before. And so I think that's really valid and valuable to have. And so that we're all kind of headed towards the same North Star. For next month, we will be talking about Q4 nightmares. Is your sales team haunted by a lack of innovation? So join us on October 24th to find out what you can do to really bring that innovation home for the rest of the year. Thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.